Hello, my name is Aveline. My brother's wedding was supposed to be a celebration of family, but for me, it was the night I was erased. No seat at the table, no photo on the wall. Whispers that I didn't belong. They mocked my uniform, dismissed my service, and turned my silence into their entertainment. But what they didn't know was that every cruel laugh, every missing picture, every empty chair was leading to one moment that would change everything. Do you want to know what happened when the general stood up and saluted me? Snow fell thick and silent as I drove into Aspen. The mountains towered above me, their peaks glowing faintly in the pale January light, while the resort looked like it had been plucked out of a glossy magazine. White lights strung across balconies, polished cars lined up outside, and valet attendants moving briskly through the cold. It should have felt festive, even enchanting. Instead, I felt a dull ache in my chest, the kind of weight you carry when you're walking into a place where you're not entirely welcome. I parked my own car, ignoring the valet who looked at me like I didn't belong in that line of luxury SUVs. I had come here because it was my brother's wedding. No matter how many times I told myself I didn't need their approval anymore, something inside me couldn't stay away. I'm the youngest in the family, the one they learned to overlook. My brother Dorian, the golden child, the flawless son, was about to marry into a family even more prominent than ours, and I suppose they thought my presence would be more of a complication than a blessing. Still, I came. The lobby was warm, the air filled with a mix of pine scent and perfume. People laughed, their voices bouncing off marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I pulled off my coat and headed to the check-in table, where staff members in crisp uniforms handed out envelopes with names written in elegant calligraphy. When I reached the front, the woman behind the desk smiled mechanically. "Name, please?" "Aveline," I said, giving my full name. Her smile flickered. She shuffled through the stack once, then again, slower this time. Her brows knit together. "I'm so sorry, you're not listed here." The words landed harder than they should have. Not listed. I leaned in, keeping my voice even. "Can you check again? I'm the groom's sister." She looked again, then shook her head. "It must have been an oversight. You can just sign in manually." She slid a blank card toward me, along with a cheap pen that wobbled in my hand. I signed, my handwriting stiff, trying not to let my face betray anything. Around me, other guests walked off with gold-embossed cards, their names written in looping script. Mine was a plain slip of paper with my name scribbled in black ink. I tucked it into my clutch, the sting settling low in my stomach. It was only a name card, I told myself. But it was also more than that. Inside the main ballroom, the warmth pressed in from every corner. Tables draped in white linen and topped with glittering glassware filled the room. I scanned quickly for my place. Each spot had a little folded card, names spelled perfectly, seating carefully arranged near the stage or under the chandeliers. But not mine. I asked a server in passing, and he pointed me to an overflow table near the far corner. I followed his gesture, and there it was. A small round table shoved near the restroom entrance. A place where people walked past constantly, where the music from the band sounded muffled and distorted. As I sat down, a middle-aged couple brushed past me. The woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, not quietly enough, "Is she catering staff?" The words sliced through me. I didn't react, didn't turn, didn't defend myself. I just sat a little straighter, letting their assumption hang in the air while I forced my breath to stay calm. Years in uniform had taught me discipline, taught me how to mask humiliation with silence. The truth was, I had been here before, different places, same feeling. The invisible sister, the one forgotten in family photos, left out of inside jokes, erased from the narrative of what made us special. Dorian, with his easy charm and his father's smile, always took center stage. Me, I had to build my own path. I'd worn my country's uniform, faced danger most of them couldn't imagine, and still, here, in this glittering hall, I was just someone who didn't belong. I folded my hands in my lap, staring at the golden glow of the chandeliers. A small part of me wondered if showing up had been a mistake. Maybe I should have stayed home in Colorado Springs, sipping coffee on my porch and letting them go on without me. But another part of me, The part forged in long nights overseas, the part that had carried brothers and sisters in arms through fire, knew better. Walking away now would be surrender, and I wasn't built for surrender. I looked across the room, eyes catching on a gleaming photo wall set up near the stage. Enlarged pictures of Dorian and his bride-to-be beamed down at the guests, their smiles flawless, their happiness staged perfectly. Something about it made my chest tighten. If they erased me at the check-in desk, if they erased me from the table, what else had they planned? The moment I stepped closer to the so-called memory wall, I felt my chest tighten. The photos glistened under soft golden lights, baby pictures, family vacations, graduations, moments that were meant to tell the story of our family. But as my eyes moved from frame to frame, one truth became painfully clear. I wasn't in any of them. Not a single photograph. Not one glimpse of me standing beside my brother, not even a blurred corner of my smile in the background. It was as if I had never existed. I scanned each row twice, my heart pounding harder the longer I looked. Childhood birthdays lined the top, all balloons and frosting smeared across Dorian's cheeks. School dances, football games, family trips to Yellowstone, each one polished and enlarged. Dorian at the center, Callista now woven in, their parents smiling wide. But me, nothing. It wasn't an accident. You don't leave someone out of dozens of carefully chosen images by mistake. My name card might have been forgotten earlier, but this was deliberate. My absence was the design. I took a step back, feeling the warmth drain from my face. People laughed and pointed at the photos, nudging each other as they recalled the good old days. I pressed my lips together, fighting the urge to say something, anything that would cut through the illusion. Instead, I wrapped my arms around myself, standing still as the noise around me blurred into a low hum. Behind me, voices carried. Two of my aunts, their heels clicking softly on the marble, settled near enough that I could hear every word. "She doesn't really contribute anyway," one whispered. "Military pay isn't much, right?" the other replied, tone dipped with casual scorn. "I suppose that's why Dorian does so much for the family, always carrying the weight." My throat closed. I gripped the stem of my glass until it threatened to snap. My service, years of it, reduced to a paycheck in their gossip. They hadn't seen the nights I slept in desert tents, the faces of friends I lost, the grit it took to come home and build myself again. To them, I was just the sister who never gave enough. I turned slightly, catching their reflections in the polished surface of the photo frames. They didn't notice me, or if they did, they didn't care. Their voices fell lower, laughter dripping at the end of each sentence, like I was just another story to toss around before dinner. I set my glass down on a nearby table, steadying my hand. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Across the ballroom, my gaze landed on her, my mother. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe she would rescue me from the spiral. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. Hope stirred, fragile as glass. I waited for a nod, a smile, some small sign that she saw me and that I still mattered. But instead, she turned away. Her face brightened as she leaned into another conversation, her laughter carrying across the room. She smiled for them, not for me. The cut was sharper than anything my aunts had said. My own mother had sanctioned it. She had seen me standing there, and she had chosen not to reach out. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that rejection settle deep inside. I had fought battles half a world away, stared down men who wanted me gone, but this kind of erasure hurt more, because it came from the people whose love was supposed to be unconditional. I closed my eyes, pulling in a slow breath. I told myself I would not let them break me. They had taken my seat, erased my picture, chipped at my worth with whispers and glances, but I was still standing. My service was not measured by their approval. My identity was not a reflection of their photo wall. "They will not break me tonight," I whispered under my breath. A sudden tap on the microphone from the stage drew the room's attention. The master of ceremonies smiled broadly, asking the crowd to gather for toasts. Glasses clinked, chairs scraped across the floor, and a hush fell as my brother Dorian strolled to the center with a confident grin plastered across his face. He raised his glass, his voice booming over the speakers. My chest tightened. I knew that smile. I knew the way he loved to perform when all eyes were on him. Whatever words he was about to say, they would be sharpened for effect. I held my breath as Dorian lifted his glass, ready to make the toast that could cut deeper than silence. The clinking of glass filled the ballroom as the crowd drew closer to the stage. I stayed at my table in the corner, my glass raised but my hand trembling slightly. My smile felt forced, stiff against the heat building under my skin. Around me, guests leaned in with easy laughter, waiting for my brother to charm them with words that would no doubt paint him as the shining star of the evening. Dorian stood in the spotlight, his tuxedo fitted perfectly, his posture commanding attention as if he had been born for this stage. He soaked it in, the glow, the silence, the dozens of eyes fixed on him. I could feel the steady rhythm of my heart picking up, each beat tapping against my ribs like a warning drum. I had sat through enough of his speeches to know that somewhere between the charm and the wit, he always found a way to remind me where he thought I belonged. He began smoothly, his voice rolling across the room with practiced ease. "Family is the cornerstone of who we are," he said. "And tonight, I am grateful to be surrounded by those who shaped me, those who supported me, those who always believed in me." The audience murmured approval, glasses tilting higher. My eyes remained fixed on him, waiting for the shift I knew was coming. He paused just long enough to let the room settle, then added with that crooked smile of his, "Even my sister." His eyes flicked in my direction, the corner of his mouth lifting higher. She tried so hard, but some things just aren't meant to shine. Laughter bubbled across the room, polite and confused, the kind people give when they're not sure if the punchline is cruel. To them, it sounded like a brother's teasing. To me, it was a blade twisting where the bruise was already deep. Heat surged up my neck, flooding my cheeks. I pressed my lips together, forcing the smile to stay in place. I did not move. I did not break. That was my training after all. Stand tall under fire, even when it's coming from the person you once trusted most. But inside, I burned. The toast ended with cheers and claps, everyone delighted by Dorian's easy charm. Chairs shifted as dinner plates arrived, servers weaving through tables. I thought maybe the moment had passed, maybe I could fade into the noise again. But then a guest leaned toward me, an older man with kind eyes, and asked warmly, "So what's it like in the Air Force?" The question was simple, genuine, yet the air around the table shifted. My family fell silent. Forks hovered in midair. No one looked at me. It was as though he had asked a question about a stranger sitting among them. I felt my throat tighten, the silence stretching longer than I could bear. Finally, I forced a small laugh, clearing my throat. It's challenging," I said, my words faltering for the first time all night. "But it's something I'm proud of." No one chimed in. No one added a word about sacrifice or service or pride. The conversation veered away quickly, as if my answer had been an interruption. I sat back, staring at my untouched plate, the laughter and chatter of other tables sounding like it came from another world. It was the kind of silence that screamed louder than mockery ever could. And then, as I pushed through the ache, an old memory surfaced, uninvited, sharp, and raw. Graduation night. The gymnasium smelled of fresh paint and floor wax, the stage lined with red and white balloons. I had searched the bleachers, scanning rows of proud families, certain I'd find their faces. But the seats where my parents should have been were empty. I told myself they must have been delayed, stuck in traffic, caught up in something important. But deep down, I knew better. They had chosen not to be there. That absence had cut deep then, and standing here now, years later, the wound tore open again. My brother's toast, my mother's turned gaze, the gossip, the silence, they all piled onto that same hollow space inside me, the one carved by being unseen. I wrapped my fingers tightly around my glass, so tight my knuckles whitened. My eyes drifted toward Callista. She caught my stare, her lips curving into a slow smirk, as if she knew the game wasn't over. If this was just the beginning, what more were they planning for me tonight? The laughter from Dorian's toast lingered in the air, hollow and uneasy, before tapering into the shuffle of guests adjusting their seats and sipping their drinks. I sat still, my smile brittle, watching how easily cruelty could slip into the bloodstream of a room when disguised as humor. A single line at my expense had turned into a shared chuckle, a ripple of complicity. My humiliation had been converted into entertainment. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat and lifted the microphone again. "And now," he announced with warmth that felt rehearsed, "the lovely bride would like to say a few words." The spotlight shifted, sliding across the parquet floor until it landed on Callista, radiant in her white gown, her expression sweet enough to be painted. She stepped forward with the grace of someone who knew every eye was hers. "Tonight is about family," she said, her voice soft but carrying, "and I want to celebrate the people who made this union possible." The audience leaned in, charmed already. Then came the invitation. "I'd love for the family to join us up here for a photo op." The photographer read names from a small list, each one greeted with applause. Dorian first, of course, followed by Isolde, our mother, then cousins and uncles, even distant relatives who barely knew Callista. One by one, they climbed onto the stage, their faces glowing under the lights. But not mine. My name was never called. I stood a few feet away, stranded at the edge of the ballroom, clutching my glass as the cluster of family gathered on stage. I was visible enough for guests to notice me, yet invisible to the roll call that mattered. Half of me belonged, half of me didn't, a shadow in the corner of my own bloodline. I could feel the ache deep in my chest, the sting of being unclaimed. The photographer snapped frame after frame, flashes of light catching every smile but mine. I lowered my gaze, pretending to study the bubbles in my drink, though my ears burned with the awareness that people were watching me not stand there, not belong. Then Callista tilted her head, her eyes landing on me with mock surprise. "Oh, Aveline," she cooed, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness. "You're our soldier, aren't you? Why don't you say something inspiring for us? A little wisdom, maybe a story from your service. You've always got such perspective." The microphone was extended toward me, expectant hands urging me to perform. A hush spread across the ballroom, eager for the curiosity of a spectacle. To them, it was harmless, a chance for me to contribute. But I knew better. This wasn't an invitation. It was a trap. A staged test where whatever I said could be twisted, mocked, or forgotten. My pulse hammered as I took the mic, its weight heavier than it should have been. For a breath, I considered playing along, tossing out a neat line about courage or sacrifice. But that would make me their circus act, their novelty soldier who validated their party. I steadied my breath. My eyes swept the crowd, then locked on Callista's smile, bright as porcelain but sharp as glass. "Not tonight," I said, my voice firm, even. Gasps fluttered through the room, followed by nervous laughter. I handed the microphone back without breaking eye contact. The silence that followed was sharp, suspended, until Callista's smirk widened just enough to let me know she thought she had won. But in that refusal, something shifted inside me. This was no longer clumsy oversight. This was strategy, each move designed to cut me down. And if they thought I would continue to bow my head and absorb it, they were wrong. I sat back down, the hum of chatter resuming around me. My heartbeat slowed, my jaw clenched. I could almost hear her voice whispering through that smirk. "You played right into my hands." Maybe so. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. If she believed I would stay quiet forever, she was in for a rude awakening. If Callista's words were venom, the next strike would come from the shadows, more calculated, more cruel. The ballroom hummed with noise, 100 conversations spilling into the air at once. Laughter rolled from every corner, the clink of glasses punctuating each burst. I stood near a side table lined with half-empty champagne flutes and forgotten napkins, pretending to be absorbed in the arrangement of roses while my pulse tried to steady itself. After Callista's little performance, the sweetness of her words still clung to me like poison, and I struggled to peel it off. Around me, clusters of guests formed tight circles, shoulders brushing, heads leaning close as though sharing secrets too precious to be heard by outsiders. I wasn't invited into any of them. Instead, I floated on the margins, invisible but still exposed, like a blemish the room politely ignored. The sound of a glass breaking somewhere drew another round of laughter. I pressed my thumb into the stem of my drink to stop my hand from trembling. It wasn't combat, but my body responded as if it were, heart racing, chest tightening, a low hum of survival running under my skin. Then it happened. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years set her phone down carelessly on the table beside me, its screen lit up with the brightness of a message thread. I caught the glow out of the corner of my eye, and before I could look away, the words struck me. Why did she even show up? Underneath, strings of digital laughter followed, mockery sealed in tiny, cruel symbols. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might be sick. This wasn't just one person's pettiness, it was a chorus, a planned performance behind the curtain. They weren't just ignoring me tonight. They had agreed, somewhere, that I didn't belong. The phone dimmed, sliding back into the safety of her purse, but the damage was done. My chest constricted, air harder to draw. I felt the ballroom closing in, the chandeliers glaring down like interrogators. My family's cruelty was no longer confined to whispers or staged jokes. It had been codified, passed around in writing, an agreement of erasure. I needed to breathe. Murmuring something vague about fresh air, I slipped out of the cluster and walked toward the hallway near the exit. The noise of the ballroom dulled behind me, replaced by the softer echo of my heels on marble. I leaned against the cool wall, pulling in deep breaths until my chest loosened. I thought about the desert nights overseas, the silence broken only by distant engines or the wind shifting sand. Out there, loneliness was heavy, yes, but it was honest. It didn't pretend to love you. It didn't wear the face of family while it carved pieces out of you. I clenched my fists, nails pressing crescents into my palms. They would not break me tonight. They might laugh, they might erase, but I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. A soft shuffle of shoes drew my attention. An elderly woman passed by, her steps careful but sure. I recognized her vaguely. Vera, a family friend, someone invited for her long friendship with Callista's grandparents. She slowed as our eyes met. There was no pity in her gaze, only recognition, a quiet strength, the kind that comes from battles of her own, and then, almost imperceptibly, she gave a nod, sharp, deliberate, almost like a salute. The breath I'd been holding eased from my chest. For the first time that night, I felt seen, not pitied, not erased, seen. That single gesture anchored me, a reminder that truth doesn't need applause. I straightened my back. My reflection in the polished floor no longer looked like someone shrinking into the wallpaper. My voice inside, steady now, whispered, if this was their idea of family unity, they had no idea what unity really meant. From the ballroom behind me, Dorian's laughter boomed again, sharper this time, his words riding on it, loud enough to cut through the walls. The laughter around the bar carried across the ballroom like a wave, pulling heads in its direction. Guests had grown louder as the night wore on, their words sharpened by champagne and the comfort of being surrounded by friends. I lingered near the edge, hoping to blend into the hum of conversation. But then I heard my name rise above the noise. Dorian's voice. It carried with the ease of someone used to being heard. He leaned against the polished bar, one hand wrapped around a drink, the other gesturing broadly as if he were telling some hilarious story. I could feel the shift in the room, the way people leaned closer, how their laughter stilled just enough to let his words cut through. My chest tightened as I braced myself. Her promotions? He said, smirking at the crowd gathered around him. Pity promotions. The military likes to hand out medals to make everyone feel included. The words hung in the air a second too long before the laughter returned. Hesitant at first, then rolling more easily as people decided to play along. Some nodded politely, others laughed without looking at me, the way you laugh at a joke you don't really find funny but don't want to oppose. My body locked. The drink in my hand turned sour. It wasn't just the insult, it was the casualness of it, the way he reduced years of sweat and sacrifice into nothing more than charity work. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. And then Callista's voice chimed in, light as a feather. At least you get a uniform, Aveline. Makes pictures look serious. The guests laughed again, this time more freely, as if her charm gave them permission. My ears burned. I set my glass down on a nearby table with deliberate care, my fingers trembling only slightly. The laughter faded, leaving behind an emptiness that pressed against my chest. I realized then, silence was being used as a weapon. No one defended me. Not a cousin, not an uncle, not even the ones who had once written to me when I was overseas. Their quiet assent cut deeper than words. The crowd shifted, and an older guest, a man I recognized vaguely from Callista's side, offered me a warm smile. I just want to say I respect your service. Not many people understand what it takes. For a heartbeat, I felt the ground steady beneath me, but before I could respond, Dorian spoke again, quick and loud enough to drown out the kindness. Yeah, but real heroes don't show up at weddings just to prove a point. The laughter came sharper this time, fueled by the cruelty of his interruption. Callista slid her hand onto his arm, a silent reinforcement, and the crowd's smiles widened. Their unity was a net, and I was caught in the center. My pulse pounded. The humiliation was thick, pressing against my skin, demanding I either crumble or explode. But somewhere inside, something shifted. I inhaled deeply, not as surrender, but as strategy. I would not fight on their terms, not tonight. They wanted me invisible. Fine. I would wait until the moment they could no longer deny I existed. My silence would not be weakness. It would be the calm before the storm. As I steadied myself, my eyes drifted across the room. And that's when I saw him, General Harlan. He was standing a few feet away, his gaze fixed on me with a stillness that pierced through the noise. He didn't laugh. He didn't look away. His eyes held steady, and for the first time all night I felt the air shift in my favor. Something was about to change. General Harlan's steady gaze lingered across the ballroom, a weight that few seemed to notice, but I felt it settle on me like a silent command. My pulse slowed under it, steadied. For the first time that night, I wasn't just a target. I was being observed, measured, maybe even understood. Dorian noticed too. I could tell by the way his smirk faltered for half a second before he puffed his chest out and raised his voice again. He couldn't afford to lose the room, not after mocking me so publicly. He tapped his glass with a spoon, drawing more eyes to himself. You know, he said, tone dripping with false charm, some people join the service not to succeed but to escape responsibility, escape accountability. His laughter followed and Callista leaned into him, smiling as though cruelty was the most natural form of entertainment. The words cut deeper because they weren't careless anymore. They were sharpened, rehearsed, as though this had been waiting on his tongue long before tonight. My face grew hot, but my mind cooled. They weren't just mocking, they were trying to rewrite me in real time, in front of everyone. A ripple of laughter moved through the guests, thin and uneasy, but still laughter. The alcohol had loosened their hesitation. Cruelty, dressed in wit, felt easier to swallow. I stood still, my fingers grazing the edge of the table behind me. If I clenched my hand any tighter, I might snap the glass stem. Then another voice joined in. A bridesmaid, her dress glittering under the chandelier, chimed from the circle around Dorian. Well, she said lightly, at least the uniform looks good on her, right? Makes her look official. The room laughed again, louder this time. I caught sight of her eyes as she spoke. Cold, calculated. She wasn't defending me, she was piling on. The humiliation was no longer spontaneous, it was a chorus. I swallowed hard. Each chuckle around me pressed against my ribs, but instead of breaking me, it clarified the air. This wasn't about me being weak. This was about them being desperate. They had to work together to erase me, because I was the one thing they couldn't control. The memory of an old commander's words surfaced in my mind. The loudest room falls quiet when truth walks in. I steadied my breathing. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was a blade I kept sheathed, waiting for the right moment. Let them laugh. Let them build their walls higher. When I struck, it would be with something they couldn't dismiss as a joke. From across the room, I caught Dorian leaning into Callista, whispering in her ear. She laughed softly, but her eyes flicked toward me, glittering with malice. The trap was tightening, and they wanted me to feel every twist of it. Inside, I told myself, let them. I'll break their fortress with one strike, and they'll never see it coming. The ballroom dimmed as the MC tapped the microphone, his voice calling for silence. I felt the chatter and laughter around me dissolve into a hush, the kind that made every movement sharper. The lights softened to a warm amber glow, casting the head table in a kind of reverent spotlight. Callista stood, her sequined gown glittering like ice under the chandeliers, her smile wide and rehearsed. She lifted her glass with practiced grace. "Before we all head to the dance floor," she said sweetly, "I want to share a few words about the strength of family, the people who built us into who we are today." I felt my chest tighten. Every muscle in me braced. I had been through enough of her barbs cloaked in honey to know that her charm carried a blade. Her words flowed like silk at first. She praised Dorian's endless resilience, his parents' guidance and sacrifices, cousins and friends who had always been there. With each name, guests nodded, smiled, clinked their glasses in support. And with each name, my heart sank lower. My own name never came. I scanned the faces in the crowd. A few eyes flickered toward me, some with pity, some avoiding me altogether. They knew. They could hear the omission as clearly as I felt it. And yet, they smiled politely, complicit in the ritual. I gripped the stem of my glass so tightly, my knuckles whitened. Her words weren't oversight. They were a scalpel, cutting me out of my own bloodline with deliberate precision. "And that," Callista concluded with a soft laugh, "is what family means. Unity, loyalty, standing together." The irony was acid in my throat. For a heartbeat, silence stretched across the ballroom, thick and heavy. My pulse roared in my ears. I felt smaller than I had in years, as though I had been stripped naked before the crowd. And then, a chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. At the head table, General Harlan rose to his feet. His presence alone pulled the air taut. The room instinctively fell quieter, as though every guest suddenly realized authority itself had stood. He didn't look at Callista. He didn't look at Dorian. His eyes locked on mine. Then, with deliberate, unmistakable precision, he brought his hand to his brow in a crisp, formal salute. The ballroom gasped. It was not a casual nod, not a polite acknowledgement. It was the salute of a commanding officer honoring a fellow soldier. In that instant, his gesture thundered louder than any words ever could. Heat surged through me, but it wasn't shame this time. It was pride, sharp and overwhelming, rising like fire from my chest. My eyes burned, though I fought to steady them. For the first time that night, I was not erased. I was seen. I rose slowly, as if my legs moved on their own. I returned his gaze, holding it steady. The room followed my movement, hundreds of eyes drawn to me not with mockery, but respect. Dorian's smile faltered. Callista's glass trembled in her hand, the facade of sweetness slipping for just a second. It was a reversal so swift and absolute it felt like the earth had shifted beneath us. Their months of planning, their careful little humiliations, had unraveled with a single salute. I stood taller, my breath calmer, as if the years of doubt and dismissal had been pierced by that moment of truth. For the first time that evening, I was no longer a shadow in the corner. I was the storm they could no longer silence. The murmurs erupted almost immediately, whispers rippling across tables like wind through grass. Guests leaned toward one another, questions buzzing, loyalties shifting. Some clapped awkwardly, others simply stared, caught between the old story of the family and the undeniable respect that now defined me in the room. I let the calm settle inside me, steady and deep. They had wanted me erased. Instead, I had been written back into the room in ink no one could wash away. And I knew then, the night wasn't over. Neither was my reckoning with them. The air in the ballroom felt different after the salute. It was as if someone had struck a bell and the vibrations were still humming through the walls, rearranging the very air we breathed. Guests shifted in their seats, some whispering, some clapping softly as though afraid to break the spell. Others simply stared, eyes darting between me and the head table where General Harlan still stood tall. For the first time all evening, I existed in the room, unshakably, unavoidably. Dorian forced a laugh, the sound brittle and too loud. "Well," he said, raising his glass high, "that was unexpected." The chuckles that followed were thin, unconvincing. His charm no longer carried so easily. I could see it in his eyes, the unease, the desperate need to pull the spotlight back under his control. He tried again, this time slipping into the voice he used when giving speeches at family reunions. "We all appreciate service," he said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "But tonight isn't about medals or uniforms. It's about unity, about celebrating what makes us strong as a family." His words trailed just a little at the edges, the confidence forced. I could almost hear the tremor in his throat. For the first time, he wasn't mocking me. He was scrambling. The crowd sensed it. Heads tilted. Some guests exchanged glances that carried questions rather than laughter. The weight in the room was no longer on me. It had shifted back toward him. At a table near the dance floor, a younger cousin whispered too loudly, "Didn't she get a medal last year? Why didn't anyone mention that?" Another voice, hushed but firm, answered, "I read about it in the paper. Something about valor overseas. They didn't say a word tonight." Their murmurs spread like cracks spidering across glass. Little pieces of truth broke free, slipping into the open where no one could ignore them. I hadn't said a single word, but the silence that once erased me now worked on my behalf. I stayed still, watching, feeling the current tilt in my favor. Then it happened. Callista, her smile stretched too tight, leaned into the microphone as though she could smooth the edges, but her voice snapped instead. She always makes things about herself. The words cut sharper than she intended. Her tone was shrill, brittle, no longer the polished sweetness she had wrapped herself in all night. Several guests frowned. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the room. Someone near the back actually shook their head. In that instant, her mask cracked wide open and everyone saw what lay beneath. I should have felt triumphant, and part of me did. But another part ached. It shouldn't have taken this long, or a stranger's salute, for my own family's cruelty to be visible. Still, I held my silence. And this time, it wasn't the silence of defeat, it was power. Their empire of smiles was cracking, and I didn't need to lift a finger. The silence that followed Callista's outburst pressed heavy against the chandeliers. I could feel every guest breathing it in, exchanging glances that carried more weight than any toast. My brother's smile stayed fixed, but it was cracking around the edges. Callista tried to hold her glass like nothing had shifted, but the tremor in her hand betrayed her. I stayed quiet. That was my choice. It wasn't me they feared anymore. It was what the silence around me was beginning to reveal. Then a chair scraped back from one of the tables near the front. An older man, gray at the temples and dressed in a modest suit, cleared his throat. He looked around the room before fixing his eyes on Dorian. "Forgive me," he said, his voice carrying more than it should have in the stillness. "But wasn't your sister awarded the Distinguished Service Medal last year?" The air snapped. For a moment, no one moved. Guests turned toward me, some startled, others suddenly remembering headlines they had skimmed but never mentioned. My stomach clenched, but I kept my lips pressed together. It wasn't my place to answer, not this time. The whispers came fast. "I thought I saw it in the Gazette. Wasn't there a ceremony in D.C.? Why wouldn't her family say anything?" The omission was no longer invisible. It was glaring, undeniable, and hanging over the room like smoke. Before anyone could recover, another voice rose from the side table, steady, deliberate. Major Tomlin, one of General Harlan's aides, stood and reached into the folio tucked under his arm. His face was calm, but his tone carried the weight of command. "I was present," he said, opening a folded sheet of parchment-thick paper, "and I have the official citation with me." Murmurs rippled, then hushed. Tomlin read aloud, Captain Aveline Ward is awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for extraordinary heroism and unwavering devotion in defense of our nation. Her leadership and courage under fire reflect the highest traditions of military service. Gasps spread like a wave across the ballroom. Some clapped, others simply stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. I didn't move. My heart pounded, but I stood steady, letting the words settle into the room. Dorian tried to laugh, the sound harsh and hollow. That's exaggerated. She exaggerates. You know how these things work, right? But his voice cracked. His eyes darted left and right, searching for support that wasn't there. The guests didn't laugh with him. They frowned. They whispered, but not about me this time. They whispered about him. Callista leaned closer to him, her face tight with panic, but her hand slipped away when she realized too many eyes were watching. The mask was gone, the empire of smiles, the rehearsed charm. It all collapsed under the weight of one truth spoken aloud. And still, I hadn't said a word. Calm washed over me, steady as a tide. I whispered to myself, too softly for anyone else to hear. The truth always finds a way to speak. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration hall. It was as if the chandeliers had dimmed, the polished floors had dulled, and the glamour of the night had been stripped away. Guests moved in uneven clusters, their voices hushed, their glances darting between me and the fractured faces of my family. The laughter and sparkle of hours earlier were gone, leaving only a heavy silence broken by scattered whispers. I stood near the edge of the room, my back straight though my body ached with exhaustion. I felt the shift. People who once looked through me now met my eyes with something different. Some carried respect, others curiosity, but none could pretend I didn't exist anymore. And then there was my family. Their smiles collapsed into stiff masks. For them, the night's sheen had evaporated, leaving raw nerves exposed. Dorian approached first. His steps lacked their usual confidence. He moved like a man cornered. He leaned close, voice low so others wouldn't hear. "You know I didn't mean it that way," he muttered, eyes flicking nervously toward nearby guests. "It was a joke. Just a joke. Don't take it so personally." I let him speak, hearing the cracks in his tone. His words weren't about me. They were about him, about salvaging his reputation, about pretending to control what had already slipped beyond him. I looked at him without replying, and the silence between us told the truth better than any argument. His apology was as hollow as the laughter he had once relied on. Not long after, Callista's performance began. Her voice broke in a dramatic sob, her handkerchief dabbing at painted cheeks as she cried, "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. This was supposed to be my night and now it's ruined." Several of her bridesmaids rushed to her side, murmuring comfort, patting her shoulders. Yet I caught the sideways glances of other guests, the skeptical shake of a head, the frown that said her act was transparent. She wanted to be seen as the victim, but her tears rang false in the room that had already witnessed too much. I felt no satisfaction in watching her facade crumble, only a grim understanding. For years they had written me out of the story. Tonight they tried one final performance, but truth had a way of cutting through the stage lights. Then, the words that shifted the air once more, an older relative, his voice firm with weariness, spoke from across the lounge. "Enough. This family needs to face what it's done." The sentence dropped heavy, undeniable. Conversations stopped mid-syllable. Even the sobs quieted. For the first time, it wasn't me pointing at the cracks. Someone from within, someone who had lived inside the story, named it aloud. I should have felt victorious, and in a way I did. But beneath the vindication was a deep sadness. It had taken this public collapse, this spectacle, for anyone to finally admit what I had lived with for years. Truth was out, but truth alone did not mend what had been broken. When the night thinned and the guests began slipping away into the cold, I stepped outside into the mountain air. Snow glistened under the moonlight, and the silence was pure, untouched by the chaos I had left behind. I drew a deep breath, the cold filling my lungs. The war inside my family wasn't over, but tonight I had survived their fire, and I knew they could never burn me the same way again. The morning after felt like another world. The ballroom that had once glowed with crystal lights now sat hollow, chairs askew, confetti damp against the carpet. Out on the terrace, the Rockies stretched before me, peaks catching the early sun, their silence steadier than anything I had known inside that hall. The snow reflected a clean, blinding white, as if nature itself had wiped the slate clean. Resort staff moved quietly around me, collecting glasses, folding linens. Their eyes met mine differently now. Last night, some of them avoided me, treated me like a forgotten guest. This morning, they nodded with something else, respect, even caution. I wasn't the invisible sister anymore. I was the one people whispered about in the kitchen, the one who had turned a wedding into a battlefield of truth. I wrapped my coat tighter and held my phone, the weight of it grounding me. For hours, I had debated whether to act, whether to leave things as they stood, humiliation overturned by a salute and a document. But survival had never been enough for me. Silence could protect, but it couldn't rebuild. Not this time. So I pressed play. The recording filled my headphones first, their voices familiar yet harsher than ever. Dorian's chuckle, low and smug. If we cut her out of the program, no one will even notice. Callista's reply, dripping with disdain. She'll sit in the corner like she always does. Soldiers don't belong at weddings. They ruin the mood. I had captured their words the night before, in the hallway, where they thought no one was listening. The venom had been clear, deliberate, coordinated. Now it wasn't just my memory against theirs. It was evidence. With a steady breath, I hit send. The file shot out to a handful of key relatives, to community members who had defended my family's name for years. I didn't add commentary. The voices spoke louder than anything I could say. It didn't take long. My phone buzzed back almost instantly with shocked replies. I had no idea. This is shameful. They owe you more than apologies. The truth detonated like a second bombshell. Impossible to contain. But I wasn't finished. Inside the lounge, where a few family members lingered, I laid a folder on the table. It wasn't heavy, just a handful of pages, but the silence that fell as I spread them was thicker than stone. You told everyone I'd signed away my share of the estate, I said evenly, my voice carrying without a tremor. But I didn't. These are notarized copies. Transfers without my signature aren't legal. The attorney confirmed it. Dorian's face drained of color. That's not, he faltered, throat closing around words that refused to come. Callista gripped his arm, her knuckles pale, but she couldn't speak either. For years they had used shadows, omissions, whispers, forged papers, to cut me out. Now the sunlight spilled across those documents, erasing their story in black and white. You tried to erase me, I said, rising to my feet, looking at each of them in turn. You mocked my uniform. You treated my service like a costume, but I will never apologize for who I am, and neither will history. The room stayed quiet. No rebuttals, no laughter, no clever spin. Just the weight of truth settling over faces too used to wearing masks. I didn't wait for their excuses. I didn't need them anymore. Turning back toward the terrace, I stepped into the cold air. The mountains stood waiting, steady as always, their ridges catching the light of a day that belonged only to me. I drew in the crisp air, deeper than I had all night, and exhaled the heaviness of years I'd carried. I could not repair every wound. I could not force love where it had long withered. But I had carved my place, undeniable, unshakable. For once, their silence was not a weapon, it was surrender, and I walked away free. When I look back on that night, I realize something important. Dignity isn't given, it's claimed. My family tried to erase me, but the truth has a way of standing tall, even when the people closest to you turn away. What I want you to remember is this: no matter who doubts you, mocks you, or pretends you don't matter, your worth is not defined by their silence. It's defined by the choices you make, the courage you carry, and the respect you show yourself. I share my story not to dwell on pain, but to remind you that we all have battles. some on foreign soil, others at our own kitchen tables. Standing firm in who you are might not win applause right away, but it plants seeds that no one can uproot. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand tall, even when those closest to you turned away? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story touched you, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't enjoy this video, share why. I want to hear your perspective. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Together, let's keep building a community where every voice matters and every story finds its place.